As the creator of NEC Contract, when did it first dawn upon you about the need for a new contract?
Oh, well, it didn't come about like a bolt from heaven. It gradually dawned on me. I was one of the first people to try and apply this new science of project management to construction engineering projects. And it was after doing that for a few years that I realised that as project managers we were under control up to the point where we signed a contract with the main contractor. After that we lost control. If you said to the main contractor, can we do this or that, you would get what I call the sharp intake of breath syndrome. Oh, that's going to cost an awful lot of money and it's probably going to delay completion. Oh dear, how much? Can't tell, have to wait and see. You know, then that's the absolute antithesis of effective management, is the inability to react to new circumstances. And after looking into that sort of issue and other similar issues in more detail, it was clear to me that the contract was not just something which was indifferent to the effectiveness of the management, it was positively hindering good management. Even if you left it in the drawer, you had people who knew what they thought it said, and it didn't motivate them to collaborate. In fact, it motivated them to do the opposite. So it became clear to me that the way to make project management work on engineering construction projects required you to have a contract, which was a contract to manage your contribution effectively.
So what were the main drivers for the new contracts?
Oh, that's difficult because it became a very big task, but essentially it was to enable the client for an engineering or construction project to manage their contribution, for the contractors to manage, for subcontractors and suppliers to manage, in a way which enabled everybody to achieve what they wanted, clients, contractors, subcontractors and so on, and do so more effectively. Because it was very clear to me that an awful lot of money was being wasted with old-fashioned contracts. A lot of projects were finishing late, and quite a lot of them were not even doing what they were supposed to do when they were finished. So there was a huge improvement to go for, and that was what we went for. And that sort of very overarching objective produced a structure which you now know.
So that was maybe about putting the project first rather than putting the parties putting themselves first?
Not really, Rob. You did put the project first, but the way you made that happen was to motivate everybody who had a role to play that role in their own interest. So that was putting them in an important position as well.
Okay. Did you encounter many obstacles in the development of NEC contracts?
No.
There must have been some problems.
Well, there was one very big problem. When we started, nobody had made any commitment to publish what we'd eventually produce. And I and the people who helped me worked for a very long time with no certainty that what we were doing would ever see the light of day.
Did you have any rules for getting the balance right of legal obligations and responsibilities versus project management principles and procedures?
I'm afraid the answer is no again. The plan was to write a way of managing the project, which meant describing what each party did in various situations, and then say the contract is you have agreed to do this in this situation or that in that situation. And that none of that was legal, it was just a commitment to do things in a particular way. And when at a relatively late stage we did the legal checks and so on, there was very little to add, which is quite striking and unexpected.
Was there significant legal input at that stage to review or to assist?
We had we had a panel of people who were available to the drafting team, which included the very well-known construction lawyer Max Abrahamson, and he was a huge help all the way through, mainly because he understood project management and didn't look at things purely from a legal basis.
So how did you develop the contract drafting principles?
It was really fun, that was. The strict answer is I derived them from first principles, because one of the main objectives of NEC, as you know, was clarity and simplicity, and that's all about drafting, really, or its structure as well. There are no basic principles, but I ended up with a list of about 20 different things, which were characteristics of the drafting that we wanted. The obvious things are like no cross-references. All existing contracts are just totally confused by cross-references, which take you all around the document. If you follow one particular point, and by the time you've followed all the cross-references, you've forgotten what you were first looking for. So we said no cross-references, which was a novelty. But there were at least 20 different things like that, like use the present tense, like no long lists of similar words, which you get in traditional contracts. You know. The engineer will act properly, comma, sensibly, comma, with the judgment of Solomon, comma, and in other ways as the circumstances, comma, conditions, comma, time of year may require, dictate, or otherwise influence. Do you see the quantity of words there? We said none of that sort of thing. We'll choose the right word and only have one. Short sentences, short words. We had the test that we wanted to use sufficiently simple language that people would understand it whose first language was not English, and that dictated a lot of the simplicity things. But a lot of it was simple structure as well, like dividing the sections as between cost, time and function, like proper project managers do, like keeping everything on one topic together. Oh, there was hundreds of things. And the total effect was very, very radical. So when it was first published, many lawyers and conservatives said this can't be a contract, doesn't read like a contract. And they thought that was a criticism. I thought that was super.
If the contract itself is simple, how do we get users to write things like the works information, the brief to the contractor, in equally simple language?
Well, obviously the fact that the contract is in simple language sort of will encourage them to do that. But there's nothing we can do as drafters, designers of the contract to tell people anything about their other duties, particularly anything which exists before the contract is signed. You can put in a guidance note, it would be a good idea to use the same language conventions for the works information, but you can't insist upon it, of course.
You can't force it, you can just encourage it.
Yes. I mean, this is probably going off the point a bit, Rob, but when people include non-standard clauses in NEC, the famous Z clauses stuck on the end, you would know they were not part of the original because they're written in different sort of language. And they bring in all the problems which traditional, or many of them bring in all the problems of traditional drafting. In the course of my career, I've done quite a lot of work on disputes to do with engineering projects, including arbitrations and court cases. And the number of things which end up in court where at least a proportion of the argument is about what the words mean.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
There was a consultative document issued in 1991 and some early adopters. What was the feedback that you got from those?
Considering how novel what they were being asked to look at and use was, it was remarkably good. Because bear in mind, they just had this thing to use with no training. There wasn't any training. no explanation, just use it. And the feedback was very, very positive. There were criticisms, of course, and that was why we had this consultative phase. And we made some changes between the consultative edition, published in 91, and the first one for general use in 93. So it was very helpful, but basically it was positive. And it must have been, because think of the alternative. If we'd sent out, if people had used it and come back and said, this is appalling, we wouldn't be sitting here today.
Do you feel that NEC contracts are upskilling users both pre and post contract?
Obviously, NEC is so widely used now that I just wouldn't know the sort of factual answer to that. But I believe it is, because of the feedback that we get and you get. The pre-contract stage is interesting because, of course, the contract itself doesn't say anything about what you do pre-contract because it doesn't come into effect until it's signed. But there are things in NEC which I put in there to try and influence what people did pre-contract. For example, in the pre-NEC days, there were some designers of engineering and construction work who were really quite sloppy, and they would send out drawings and specification for tendering, and then contracts would be let. And then while you were doing the work, there was a continuous flow of revised drawings, etc., etc. So one of the things that we made sure of in NEC first edition, and it's still there, is that every time somebody gives a new instruction to the contractor, it potentially costs the client money. And that was done deliberately so that the pressure not to keep changing the design would be reduced, and the pressure to get it right before you went out to tender would be stronger. So that's a pre-contract influence that we wanted to achieve. But the post-contract upskilling, I don't like the word, I'd never heard it before this morning, is because really, if NEC is used well, and it is used well very widely now, what the NEC does is allows people to use the skills they've already got or would like to have. So that, you know, instead of in the old days, contractors, staff spending a lot of mental energy on pushing claims and things like this, they're actually working with the client's project manager to get this project finished properly in the interest of both people. Now that is a change of attitude, which is terribly important and hugely valuable. And to use the, upskilling doesn't get close to that as a word.
Okay, yeah, it's very much about attitude and mindset, isn't it? A completely different approach that's needed from traditional contracting.
It doesn't need it, but it stimulates it. And once people have experimented, if you like, perhaps with their first contact with NEC, with changing their mindset so that they are collaborative, they will see that it's actually good for everybody. This is the whole point. If you wanted to put up one sentence, which is what NEC is about, it's stimulating people to work together to deal with the unexpected on projects, which is the general case that there are unexpected things, for the benefit of everybody, client, contractors, designers, subcontractors, suppliers, everybody benefits.
It brings together, therefore, a very fragmented industry that we seem to have had.
Yes, I mean, and I find it very interesting when I talk to young people coming into civil engineering or engineering generally in recent years, who come first to NEC. They find it unbelievable that we ever used to work in such an adversarial way, with all the waste of money and time that produced. Why did they put up with it for so long, they say?
So what do you think is the most important feature of an NEC contract?
Actually, Rob, there isn't a most important feature. There certainly isn't one most important feature. I think the most important characteristics and they're really almost equally important, are the three things it says on the tin. Clarity and simplicity, flexibility, and stimulus to good management. And in designing NEC, all those three things had a huge influence on the design. The biggest influence was the stimulus to good project management. You could have done that in a way without having clarity and simplicity, which would have been pointless. But the flexibility thing is terribly important. It's not often talked about. It means you have the same basic contract for everybody involved in a major project or even a minor project. That's another thing that is obvious since NEC introduced it, but it wasn't like that in the past. You had quite different contracts for designers and contractors, different contracts between main contractors and subcontractors. And the opportunity to manage just wasn't there, because if you said, right, the contract says we can collaborate on this aspect of management at this point in the whole structure of the contributing organisations, and you find you couldn't do it with the next level down. Pointless, you know. So really they all three hang together. But if you like, when I would like NEC to be judged on its effect on project management, because that's really what it's all about.
So my final question is, how do you see NEC developing in the future?
How I would like it to develop is that there are some things which we need to improve, like the process for dealing with compensation events is proving too complicated for people. It's putting them off. And I think we should overhaul that. And I think other people working in the NEC field are aware of that one. A thing we also need to do something about is to see if we can discourage people from amending it. I can't understand why people so happily amend the NEC and add clauses like through the Z clause process, when with the old, really very malfunctioning contracts, I would say, they used to leave them alone. And the number of the incidence of Z clauses is far too high. And I know that we have a plan to look at that and see what can be done to either reduce the perceived necessity of including so many Z clauses. I think I don't think we need to broaden the family of NEC contracts. It's interesting that when we started designing NEC, we thought we needed the basic construction contract, and then you'd need a professional services contract, and that would be probably it, because subcontract could be virtually the same as the main contract, which it is, and all professional services could be supplied under the same contract. And my own view is in the future, we should focus on making the contracts work much better. They work pretty well now, but we know where they could be even better, if you like. I don't think there's any need to broaden the number of books in the box.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. It's very much appreciated.
It's very interesting to talk to you about it, Rob.